Okay, so, like, he's almost like two different people, right? I mean, O.J. Simpson.
Yeah, it seems like a real...
On one hand, this amazing athlete, Heisman Trophy, NFL superstar, like, he was on top of the world.
Totally, like an icon.
But then everything changes. He becomes this, like, incredibly controversial figure, one of the most, I don't know, infamous criminal cases ever. It's that contrast.
Totally, and I think that dramatic shift is a big reason why people are still so fascinated by this story, even all these years later. I mean, you have this guy who seemingly had it all, and then boom, he's at the center of this brutal crime. And it really exposed some, like, deep societal issues that nobody wanted to talk about.
So for this deep dive, we're going to try to unpack all of that. We've got all this material from pasted text, his early life, his football career, the murders, that crazy trial, and everything that came after. We really want to go beyond just the headlines and understand what made this case such a, I don't know, a cultural earthquake.
Exactly. I mean, most people know the basics, but we're going to get into the nuances, the key arguments, and the questions that linger to this day. Like, how did race play into it? What about the justice system itself? And the role of celebrity. O.J. was more than just a football player. He was this huge cultural figure. And then there's the whole domestic violence aspect of it, which is, a really important part of the story. By the end of this, you should have a much better understanding of why this case still matters so much.
So let's rewind all the way back. He didn't exactly have an easy start.
Right, yeah, not at all. He was born Orenthal James Simpson back in 1947. San Francisco, Potrero Hill neighborhood. It was like a pretty rough area, a lot of economic hardship.
Yeah.
And he had some health issues early on, too, like rickets, which, that could have really messed up his ability to walk properly.
Wow.
But even back then, he seemed to have this, like, determination to overcome stuff. It's like his later success, it wasn't just handed to him. It was like he had to fight for it from the get-go.
Yeah, and it seems like he really channeled that determination into sports, right? Like, football was his ticket to something bigger. Classic American story, almost.
Totally. I mean, by high school, it was clear he had serious talent. Ended up at City College of San Francisco, and then, of course, USC. That's where he really, exploded onto the national scene.
USC, a breeding ground for some major football talent.
Oh, yeah. They had a history. But O.J., he was something else. His playing style, people described it as electric.
Yeah.
He had this speed and power that just blew people away. And, in America, we tend to put athletes on a pedestal, right? So when they fall, it's even more shocking.
And then, 1968, the Heisman. I mean, that's not just a trophy. It's almost like...
It's like winning the lottery of college football.
Exactly. It's like a national stamp of approval. And it really solidified his status as, like, a national icon. He represented, excellence, achievement, all of that.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about being good at football. He had this charisma, this appeal that transcended the sport itself. And, that Heisman was a huge part of building that image, that sort of untouchable persona.
And then, of course, the NFL came calling. And with the Buffalo Bills, he was, breaking records left and right. The Juice became more than just a nickname. It was a brand.
Totally. That 1973 season where he set the single-season rushing record, it was insane. But what's interesting is that he didn't just appeal to football fans. He had this crossover appeal. I mean, endorsements, acting roles, he was everywhere.
Yeah, and that's the thing about charisma. It's a powerful tool. It can open so many doors. And he was really living the American dream, from those tough beginnings to becoming this huge celebrity.
Yeah, but then, as we know, things get really complicated. There's this dark side to the story that starts to emerge.
The shadow of domestic violence. That marriage to Nicole Brown in 1985. The information we have makes it pretty clear that it was a troubled relationship from the start.
Yeah, it's really disturbing when you dig into it. There are all these documented instances of abuse, police records, calls to their house.
And it's not just rumors, right? This is official stuff.
Oh, yeah. These are documented instances of violence. It paints a really disturbing picture.
It's scary that it went on for as long as it did. And even after the divorce in 1992, things didn't really get better for Nicole, did they?
No, not at all. The abuse continued, and she was clearly terrified. And this history becomes so important later on because it's a potential motive, a pretty strong one in the prosecution's view.
Yeah, it shows this pattern of control, of violence that's really concerning.
Right.
And then we have that night in June of 1994, the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman.
June 12th, outside her condo in Brentwood. It was brutal, a really violent scene.
And the investigation quickly focused on O.J., right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was the prime suspect almost immediately.
And then that chase, I remember watching it on TV. It was like something out of a movie, surreal.
that low-speed chase with him in that white Bronco, it just captivated the entire country.
It was like watching a national drama unfold in real time. It made the whole thing even more intense.
Totally. It just amplified the media frenzy. It wasn't just a local crime story anymore. It was like everyone was talking about it.
Yeah, and it was the lead up to what became known as the trial of the century. But it was about so much more than just, guilt or innocence.
Oh, absolutely. This trial became this huge cultural touchstone. It was about race, it was about the justice system itself, and it was about celebrity and how that plays into everything.
So on the one side, you had the prosecution, Marcia Clark, Christopher Darden. They built their case on the evidence, including DNA, which was still pretty new back then.
Right, DNA evidence was starting to be used more and more in court cases, and it was seen as pretty much irrefutable. They also presented that history of domestic violence, which, painted a picture of O.J. as someone capable of that kind of rage.
But the defense team, they had a different approach. They weren't just saying he didn't do it. They were going after the LAPD, the investigation itself.
Yeah, Johnny Cochran, Robert Shapiro, F. Lee Bailey was like a legal dream team. And their strategy was brilliant. They focused on casting doubt, raising questions about police misconduct, and racial bias within the department.
And that resonated with a lot of people, particularly in the African-American community, right?
Yeah.
Given the history of, tension with the police.
Absolutely. You can't understand this trial without understanding the context of race in America. The LAPD had a history of, not exactly being sensitive to minority communities. There were past incidents of, alleged brutality, racial profiling, and the